Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe this channel. Let's go. I've always loved exploring rural Japan. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the countryside, where temples hide in misty hills and moss grows thick over ancient stones. So when my friend Aiko invited me to visit her grandmother's home in Saga Prefecture, I jumped at the chance. Mount Kurokami loomed over the village like a sleeping giant. Its forested slopes were dense and shadowy, even in daylight, and the locals treated it with a quiet respect. Don't go walking there at night, Aiko's grandmother warned us, pouring green tea with a hand that trembled slightly. Things wander there when the sun sets. We smiled politely. We were city kids. Superstition didn't sit heavily on us. The house was old, made of dark wood and paper walls, filled with the scent of tatami and incense. At night, the wind hissed through the sliding doors, and the beams creaked like they were whispering to one another. On our third day, we were helping clean out the Kura, an old storage building behind the house. Dust blanketed everything, from wooden dolls to tarnished kitchenware. In the corner, hidden beneath a tattered cloth, we found an old mirror. It stood taller than me, framed with carved sakura blossoms worn smooth by time. Its glass was cloudy, like water right before a storm. Something about it made me uneasy. "That's beautiful," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Aiko tilted her head. "I don't remember seeing this here before." We dragged it out into the sunlight. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in the glass, a flash of white, like a figure, disappearing into the fog. I turned, but nothing was behind us. "Did you see that?" I asked. Aiko shook her head. "See what?" We left the mirror in the hallway, intending to ask her grandmother about it. That night, as the wind sighed against the shoji screens, I woke to a strange sound. Drip, drip. I sat up. The sound came from the hallway. I crept out of my futon, careful not to wake Aiko, and slid the door open. The mirror was still there, its surface dark and oddly wet. A drop of water slid down the glass and hit the floor. I stepped closer. My reflection stared back, faint and shimmering. But there was something else. A shape behind me, pale, still. I spun around. Nothing. When I looked back, the shape in the mirror was gone. I returned to bed, unsettled, and dreamt of a woman in white. Her face was hidden by long black hair. She stood in the forest at the base of Mount Kurokami, murmuring something I couldn't understand, her voice like wind through dead leaves. The next morning, I told Aiko. She looked pale. I think I had. "The same dream," she said. We brought it up with her grandmother over breakfast. Her face turned gray. "That mirror doesn't belong here," she said. "It was locked away for a reason." She told us the story. A century ago, a woman from the village had gone missing. Her body was never found, but her belongings, including that mirror, were discovered in a shrine on the mountain. After that, strange things began happening. People hearing whispers, seeing figures and reflections. The shrine was sealed, and the mirror was hidden away. "Some say she was a Miko who broke her vows," her grandmother said. "Others say she was taken by something older, something in the mountain. But wherever she went, she comes back through that mirror." We decided to return the mirror to where it came from. At dusk, we carried it to the edge of the forest, where a narrow path wound up Mount Kurokami. The trees pressed in around us, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. We reached the shrine just as the sun slipped behind the peak. It was barely standing, its wood eaten by rot, its roof sagging. The mirror pulsed cold in my hands. The wind died. The world went still. We set the mirror inside the shrine, just as a low sound rose from the trees. a whisper too soft to understand, but urgent. The mirror's glass rippled. A pale shape stepped into view inside the mirror, a woman in a white kimono, her hair hanging like a curtain. She raised her hand slowly, as though reaching toward us. Aiko grabbed my wrist. "Don't move!" The woman's hand hovered against the inside of the glass. Then, slowly, she turned away and walked back into the fog within the mirror, vanishing into shadows that stretched far deeper than they should. The wind returned, rustling the trees. We sealed the shrine door with rope and talismans her grandmother had prepared, then walked home in silence under the starlit sky. Back at the house, the air felt lighter. The strange dreams stopped. The whispers faded. We never saw the mirror again. Sometimes I wonder if we helped her, if the woman in the mirror had simply been lost, caught between places, waiting for someone to bring her home. Other times, I wonder if we left something behind up there on the mountain, something that watches from the trees, reflected in puddles, waiting to be seen again. I haven't gone back to Mount Kurokami, but every time I see a mirror now, especially one that's old or clouded, I find myself watching, just for a moment, waiting to see if something watches back. I had always been fascinated by Japan's countryside, the ancient temples, dense bamboo groves, and the quiet beauty of its rural villages. When my friend Yuki invited me to visit her hometown in a remote mountain region during Obon Festival, I jumped at the chance. I wanted to experience the traditional customs firsthand and explore the old legends that clung to the misty hillsides. The village was small, surrounded by forests thick with cedar and maple, their leaves already tinged with autumn's fiery colors. At dusk, paper lanterns flickered in the narrow streets, casting warm, dancing light. The air smelled of incense, and soft music drifted from the temple bells. Obon, Yuki explained, was a time when spirits returned to visit the living. Families lit lanterns to guide their ancestors' souls back home. It was a celebration, but also a time to respect the unseen. That evening, after the festival ceremonies, Yuki and I decided to take a walk up to an old shrine hidden deep in the woods, a place locals said was haunted by the yurei, restless spirits who wandered between worlds. The path was narrow and lined with ancient stone lanterns, their carved faces worn smooth by centuries of rain and moss. The forest was thick, shadows pooling under the gnarled branches. As we climbed higher, the village lights faded behind us, swallowed by the night. We reached the shrine just as the moon rose, a silver orb hanging low in the sky. The shrine was small and weathered, its red Torii gate chipped but still standing proud. Paper strips fluttered from ropes tied between the trees, shimenawa, marking sacred ground. Yuki lit a candle from her lantern and placed it on the stone altar. "They say the spirits come here to find peace," she said softly. I shivered, not from cold, but from the stillness around us. The forest felt different here, alive with quiet energy. Suddenly, I heard footsteps behind us, soft, deliberate, but no one was there when I turned. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. Yuki nodded, eyes wide. The yurei walk close at night. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a pale figure glide silently through the trees. A woman in a white kimono, her long black hair hanging loose and shimmering under the moonlight. Her face was obscured by shadows, but I felt her gaze, cold and distant. My breath caught. This was the spirit Yuki had warned me about. The figure stopped near the altar, bowed her head, and seemed to whisper something too faint to hear. "Yuki," and I stayed frozen, watching as she vanished like mist. "Is she?" I began. "A yurei," Yuki confirmed. Bound by sorrow, unable to move on. We didn't dare linger longer. Walking back down, the path seemed to shift and twist, the trees closing in as if guiding us away. Back in the village, the lanterns glowed softly, and the festival's music rose again. The night had been filled with unseen eyes and silent watchers, but we were safe. I never forgot that night, the gentle glow of the lanterns, the sorrowful spirit at the shrine, and the quiet reminder that some souls linger, waiting for their story to be heard. I had always been fascinated by Japan's old legends and the way the past seemed to whisper through its forests and temples. So, when I planned a trip through the countryside, I made sure to visit a remote mountain village I'd read about. One, with an ancient Shinto shrine hidden deep in the woods, wrapped in mist and mystery. The locals called it Kage Jinja, the Shrine of Shadows. Few dared to visit, especially at dusk, when the forest swallowed the last light and the mist crept down from the peaks. The village elder had warned me with a serious tone. Respect the spirits, or they may follow you home. But I was curious and a little skeptical. I arrived on a quiet afternoon. The village was small, tucked into a valley surrounded by towering cedar and maple trees that blazed red and gold in the autumn light. I asked directions, and the villagers spoke in hushed voices, eyes flicking nervously toward the dark forest that climbed the mountain. The path to Kagejinja was narrow and steep, winding through thick woods where the sunlight barely pierced the canopy. The air grew cooler and damper as I climbed, and the silence around me deepened. Even the birds seemed to hush their songs. Soon, a low mist began to swirl around my feet, rising steadily until the trees disappeared behind a veil of gray. I pressed forward, heart beating faster. At last, I saw it. The shrine. It was small and ancient, built of weathered wood and stone, with a bright red Torii gate standing guard at the entrance. Moss crept over the roof and steps, and thin tendrils of smoke curled from a small incense burner. As I stepped under the Torii, the mist thickened, wrapping me in a cold embrace. The forest fell completely silent. No rustling leaves, no bird calls, just the soft drip of water from the eaves. I bowed respectfully and lit a candle at the altar, whispering a quiet prayer to the kami, the spirits said to dwell here. Suddenly, a soft rustling came from the trees behind me. I turned quickly, expecting an animal, but saw only shadows shifting through the mist. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. It wasn't a shout or cry, but a gentle song, melancholy and sweet, like a lullaby carried on the wind. Curious and a little uneasy, I followed the sound deeper into the mist. The trees grew taller and closer, their branches weaving a dense ceiling overhead. The song led me to a small clearing where a figure stood. A woman in a flowing white kimono, her hair long and dark, shimmering in the gray light. Her face was pale as moonlight, her eyes deep pools of sorrow. She held a paper lantern, its flickering flame barely cutting through the mist. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Then she began to sing again, the haunting melody wrapping around me like a thread I couldn't break. I felt no fear, only a strange calm, as if her song was a message meant for me. Suddenly, she turned and vanished into the fog, leaving behind only the soft echo of her voice. I stood frozen, heart pounding, as the mist slowly lifted and the forest sounds returned. The rustle of leaves, the chirping of crickets, the gentle breeze. I made my way back to the shrine, feeling the weight of something unseen watching over me. Back in the village, I shared my story with the elder, who nodded knowingly. "The Lady of the Mist," he said quietly. "She is a guardian and a mourner, caught between worlds. She watches the shrine and those who come with respect. You were fortunate. Many do not leave so peacefully." That night, as I lay in my room, I thought of the woman's song and the mist that cloaked the shrine. The spirits of Kagejinja had touched me, reminding me that some mysteries are not meant to frighten us, but to remind us of the thin veil between our world and the next. I left the village the next morning, the memory of that eerie yet beautiful encounter lingering like a whispered secret in the back of my mind. I never believed in ghosts until that night in Aokigahara. It started as a simple hiking trip. My friends and I wanted to explore the famous Sea of Trees, the dense forest at the base of Mount Fuji. The place is beautiful but notorious. Locals say it's haunted, a place where the restless dead wander. I thought it was just superstition, a tourist scare tactic to keep people safe. But the forest has a presence, something you feel deep in your bones. We arrived late afternoon, carrying lanterns and backpacks. The forest was dense, almost claustrophobic, with towering cedar trees and thick moss blanketing the ground. As we walked deeper, the air grew cooler, heavier, and strangely still. The usual sounds of birds and insects faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of our footsteps. As dusk settled, we found a small clearing near a stream to set up camp. We lit paper lanterns, traditional ones with wooden frames, and washi paper, and the warm glow cast flickering shadows on the ancient trees. The lanterns felt comforting at first, but as night fell, their light seemed to reveal shapes just beyond the edge of vision. That's when I noticed the first sign: small, hand-carved wooden dolls hanging from tree branches. Each doll was worn and weathered, their faces faint but sorrowful. According to a guidebook, these were ningyo, spirits trapped between worlds, left as offerings by those seeking forgiveness or remembrance. I shivered, though the night wasn't cold. The forest around us seemed to pulse, like it was alive and watching. Then came the soft sound, a faint whispering, like the rustle of silk or distant voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. I looked around, but no one else seemed to notice. "Do you hear that?" I whispered to Yuki, my closest friend. She nodded, eyes wide. "It's the wind, or the forest." We all fell silent, listening as the whispers grew, swirling around us like a gentle chant. The lanterns flickered, and in one sudden gust, several went out, plunging parts of the clearing into darkness. "Let's stay close," Yuki said. "This forest is known for tricking travelers." We huddled near the fire, trying to ignore the rising unease. That's when I saw her, a woman standing just beyond the firelight. She wore a flowing white kimono, stained faintly with dirt, and her long black hair fell over her face, hiding her features. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the lantern light. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood watching. I froze, heart racing. The others saw her too. We didn't dare speak. Suddenly, she lifted her head and her eyes met mine, dark, empty pools that seemed to look through me. Then, without a sound, she slowly turned and vanished into the trees. For a long moment, none of us moved. The whispers faded, replaced by the soft crackle of the fire and the distant call of a night bird. "Who was that?" Mike asked, voice shaky. "Yurei," Yuki said softly. "A kind of ghost. They say Yurei are souls who can't find peace, trapped between worlds." We debated what to do: stay and try to communicate, or leave before the forest's presence grew stronger. We chose to respect the forest. We didn't want to disturb the spirits. The rest of the night passed without further incident, though the feeling of being watched never fully left us. When dawn finally broke, the forest transformed. Sunlight poured through the canopy. Birdsong returned, and the whispering ceased. We packed up and left quietly, never speaking of what we saw. But I know now that some places hold memories and some spirits linger, not to harm, but to remind us of their stories. Okigahara isn't just a forest. It's a place where the veil is thin, and the past quietly walks beside the living. And sometimes, if you're lucky, or unlucky, you might just catch a glimpse of a white kimono drifting silently through the trees. I had heard the stories about Aokigahara, the Sea of Trees. It's a forest that stretches at the base of Mount Fuji, thick with ancient trees and silent paths that twist like serpents through the mossy floor. Locals call it the Suicide Forest. But I was drawn to it not by morbid curiosity, but by a strange, quiet fascination with the unknown. My friends warned me. It's a place where spirits linger, they said, where the dead don't rest. But I told myself those were just legends, old tales to scare tourists. One late autumn afternoon, I decided to hike a small trail into the forest. The sky was gray, clouds thick with moisture. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I carried only a small backpack, my camera, and a red paper lantern, a gift from an old shrine keeper who told me it would protect me from malevolent spirits. As I stepped into the forest, the noise of the outside world faded away. The trees grew dense and tall, their branches weaving a near-solid canopy that blocked most of the fading light. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no rustling animals, just the crunch of my boots on the fallen leaves. I followed the narrow path, marked only by faded wooden signs. Shadows stretched long and deep between the trunks. The forest felt alive, watching me. After a while, I noticed something strange. Small lanterns hanging from branches, their soft amber glow flickering in the dimness. They weren't mine. Someone else had placed them here, guiding the way deeper into the woods. Curious, I followed the trail of lanterns. As I walked, the forest seemed to close in tighter, the air growing colder. My breath came out in pale clouds. The whispering began. At first it was just the wind through the leaves, but then I heard faint voices, soft, mournful, speaking in a language I barely recognized. They seemed to be calling, pleading. Suddenly, I saw her. A woman stood in a small clearing ahead, her kimono white as snow, flowing and delicate despite the chill. Her hair was long and black, hanging loose around her shoulders. She held a single red lantern, its light glowing softly. Our eyes met. Her face was pale, almost translucent, but her eyes burned with a quiet sadness. I wanted to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. She raised her lantern and began to walk slowly along the path, turning once to look back at me. I felt compelled to follow. As I trailed behind, I saw more figures, ghostly women in white, all holding lanterns, drifting silently between the trees like living shadows. Their faces told stories of sorrow and loss, but they did not approach or threaten. Instead, they seemed to be leading me somewhere. The path twisted and wound through the forest until it opened onto a small, forgotten shrine. It was ancient, covered in moss and vines, but still standing proud amidst the trees. The woman with the red lantern stopped and turned to me one last time. Her lips moved, whispering words I could not understand. Then she placed the lantern on the shrine's altar. In that moment, the forest seemed to breathe deeply, the heavy silence lifting. The other figures gathered around the shrine, their faces softening, as if they had found peace. The lantern's glow brightened, illuminating the mossy stones and ancient carvings. The whispering faded, replaced by a gentle hum, like a prayer, carried on the wind. I felt a calmness wash over me, a connection to something beyond the world I knew. After a while, the figures slowly dissolved into the mist, leaving only the glow of the lanterns behind. I stood there for a long time, watching the forest come alive with the first light of dawn filtering through the trees. When I finally turned to leave, I realized my own red lantern was still glowing softly in my hand. Back on the trail, the forest seemed less menacing, almost welcoming. I felt a strange gratitude toward the spirits I had glimpsed. I never told anyone exactly what I saw that night. The tales of Aokigahara are full of darkness, but I came to understand that some spirits linger not to harm, but to guide. Lost souls, perhaps even the living. Sometimes the most haunted places hold the gentlest hearts. Japan has always fascinated me. Its mix of ancient tradition and modern life, the way history seems to linger in every corner. So when I was offered a trip to a remote mountain village for a week, I eagerly accepted. The village was nestled deep in the mountains of Tohoku, surrounded by dense forests and mist-shrouded valleys. It was said to be a place where old spirits still walked, where the past and present blurred like the fog that rolled through the pines. My host was an elderly couple, warm and welcoming, who lived in a small wooden house lit by paper lanterns. On my first evening, after a simple meal of rice and miso soup, the old man told me about the village's traditions. He spoke of yokai, strange creatures and spirits from Japanese folklore, and of onryo, vengeful ghosts who linger when wronged. "It's best not to walk alone after dark," he warned, his eyes serious. "Some spirits do not welcome strangers." I smiled politely but felt a chill. The village was peaceful, but the forest seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't understand. That night, unable to sleep, I decided to take a walk outside. The moon was full, casting silver light over the quiet village. Lanterns hung from wooden poles, their warm glow flickering in the night breeze. I wandered toward the old shrine at the village edge, a small, moss-covered building surrounded by towering cedar trees. The path was lined with stone lanterns, Torii, that cast long shadows on the ground. As I approached, I noticed something strange. One lantern's light was dimmer than the others, flickering erratically. Curious, I stepped closer. The flickering light seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and the forest fell silent. From the shadows near the shrine, a figure emerged. She was dressed in a white kimono, her long black hair cascading over her shoulders. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark, sorrowful eyes that seemed to look right through me. She held a red paper lantern that glowed softly, illuminating her delicate features. I froze. The woman did not speak, but her presence was heavy with sadness. Slowly, she lifted the lantern higher and began to walk down the path, her footsteps silent on the mossy stones. Compelled, I followed at a distance. She led me through the forest, the lantern's light guiding the way between ancient trees and creeping mist. The deeper we went, the thicker the fog became, until the world seemed to dissolve into shadows and whispers. At last, we reached a small clearing where an old stone statue stood, covered in moss and vines. The woman stopped and gently placed the lantern at the statue's feet. Suddenly, the wind picked up, swirling leaves around us in a dizzying dance. The woman turned to me, her eyes filled with a haunting sorrow. Then, she spoke, her voice barely, more than a whisper, but clear in the stillness. "Remember me." Before I could answer, she faded into the mist, leaving only the glowing lantern behind. I stood there, heart pounding, unsure if what I had seen was real or a dream. Slowly, I picked up the lantern. Its light was warm now, steady and comforting. I returned to the village, the lantern's glow leading me back through the fog. The next morning, I told my hosts about the woman and the lantern. The old man nodded solemnly. "That was the spirit of Akiko," he said quietly. "A woman who died long ago, waiting for someone to remember her. The lantern is her way of finding peace." He smiled gently. "You did well to follow her and carry her light. Not many would have." I kept the lantern for the rest of my stay, its soft glow a reminder of the night I walked with a ghost in the mountain forest. And though I never saw Akiko again, sometimes when the fog rolls in and the lantern flickers just so, I feel her presence near, watching, waiting, and no longer alone. I never believed in ghosts, not really. But last autumn, during a trip to rural Japan, I found myself face to face with something I couldn't explain. It happened near a place the locals called Uri Hill, Ghost Hill, a quiet, misty forest that seemed to hold its breath beneath the full moon. I was traveling with two friends, Kenji and Aiko, who grew up near the area and insisted we visit the hill at night. "You won't find anything," Kenji laughed. "Just old stories to scare tourists," but Aiko was more cautious. "There's a reason the village avoids Urai Hill after dark," she said quietly. "The lanterns. The spirits." We arrived just as twilight surrendered to night. The village was small and hushed, the narrow streets dimly lit by paper lanterns swinging gently in the wind. Our guidebook mentioned the hill's eerie reputation, but we chalked it up to local superstition. At the base of the hill, a narrow path wound upward, flanked by towering cedars. The air smelled of damp earth and fallen leaves. As we climbed, the moon rose higher, bathing the forest in pale light and casting long shadows. Kenji joked about spirits lurking behind trees, but even he grew quiet as the wind whispered through the branches. Near the summit, we found an old stone shrine, weathered by time and moss-covered. Flickering paper lanterns hung from the eaves, their flames dancing in the breeze. The lanterns gave the clearing an otherworldly glow, as if the forest itself was holding vigil. That's when I noticed her. At the edge of the clearing, a pale figure stood motionless, her white kimono glowing faintly in the lantern light. Long black hair fell over her shoulders, obscuring her face. She held a small lantern, which swayed gently though there was no wind. My breath caught. Aiko whispered, "Yurei, a wandering spirit who can't find peace." Kenji stepped forward, voice steady. "She's part of the old legends, a woman who lost her way, doomed to roam the hill, searching for something she can't have." I wanted to believe it was just a trick of the light, or a local in costume. But as we watched, the figure lifted her head. Though her face remained hidden in shadow, I felt her eyes on us, cold and sorrowful. The lantern in her hand flickered, once, twice, then steadied. A soft, mournful song drifted through the trees, an ancient melody sung in a voice both haunting and beautiful. My heart pounded. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees bending as if to listen. Aiko said, "It's the lantern's song. They say the Yurei sings to guide lost souls, but it can also lead the living astray." Kenji shook his head. "We should leave." As we turned to go, the figure began to move, not walking, but gliding over the mossy ground. She stayed just beyond the edge of the clearing, always watching, never approaching. I felt a chill run down my spine, but forced myself to stay calm. We hurried down the path, the lantern's light flickering behind us like a ghostly flame. The song faded into silence, replaced by the natural sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owl calls. Back in the village, the warmth of lantern light and quiet voices felt safe. We talked about what we'd seen, trying to find rational explanations. An actress, a prank, a trick of moonlight and shadow. But deep down, I knew we'd glimpsed something real. Something ancient, tied to the land and the night. I still hear that song sometimes, soft and distant, calling from the edge of memory, like the lantern's glow on Urai Hill. And though nothing bad happened to us, I understand why the villagers warn against wandering there after dark. Some spirits don't seek to harm, they only wish to be remembered. Japan has always fascinated me. Its mix of ancient traditions and modern life, the quiet beauty of its landscapes, and especially its stories of the supernatural. When I had the chance to visit a remote village in the mountains, I jumped at it. I wanted to experience the old Japan, the one where legends still lived in the shadows. The village was small, surrounded by thick bamboo groves that rustled softly in the wind. The locals were polite but reserved, and when I asked about the bamboo forest, their expressions grew serious. "Beware the lantern," one old man warned me quietly. "It appears at night, near the heart of the grove. Those who follow it sometimes return, but never quite the same." I laughed nervously, brushing it off as superstition. But that night, curiosity pulled me toward the bamboo. I slipped away from the inn after dinner, the moon casting a pale glow over the village. The path to the bamboo grove was narrow and winding, lined with ancient stone lanterns that flickered weakly in the evening mist. As I entered the grove, the bamboo stalks towered above me, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The air grew cooler, heavier, like the forest was holding its breath. Then I saw it, a small lantern, glowing faintly, hanging from a slender bamboo branch just ahead. The light flickered like a ghost's breath, warm and inviting against the cold night. I hesitated, heart pounding, but the lantern seemed to beckon me forward. Step by step, I followed it deeper into the grove. The bamboo bent and swayed, casting long, twisting shadows. The path disappeared beneath fallen leaves and tangled roots, but the lantern remained just ahead, floating gently in the darkness. After a while, I realized I was utterly alone. The sounds of the village vanished behind me. The only sound was the soft tapping of my footsteps and the occasional creak of bamboo. The lantern's glow brightened suddenly, and in that light I saw a figure. A woman in a white kimono, her face pale and serene, her black hair flowing, down her back like a waterfall. She didn't speak, but her eyes met mine with a quiet sadness. I wanted to turn back, but something kept me rooted in place. Respect, fear, and fascination all tangled inside me. The woman slowly raised a hand and pointed toward a clearing ahead. I followed her gaze and stepped into the open. There, nestled between the bamboo, was a small stone shrine, ancient and weathered. The lantern's light settled on the shrine's carved guardian statues, foxes with knowing eyes, watching silently. The woman's lips moved, whispering words. I couldn't understand, but the air thrummed with their power. Suddenly, the lantern flickered and dimmed, and the woman began to fade, becoming part of the shadows between the bamboo. I blinked, and she was gone. The lantern's light vanished with her, leaving me alone in the cool darkness. My heart thundered, but I felt no fear, only a deep calm, like I had been granted a secret glimpse into another world. I knelt by the shrine, bowing my head in respect. When I finally found my way back to the village, the first light of dawn was breaking through the mist. I never saw the lantern or the woman again, but the memory of that night, the gentle sadness in her eyes and the quiet power of the bamboo grove, stays with me. Sometimes I wonder if she was a guardian spirit, watching over the village and its secrets. Or maybe she was a whisper from the past, reminding me that some stories live forever, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be found. Japan has always fascinated me. The ancient temples, the misty mountains, and the quiet beauty of places untouched by time. So when I was invited to visit a small village nestled near a famous bamboo grove, I jumped at the chance. I wanted to experience something different, something authentic. The village was surrounded by dense bamboo forests that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. The locals spoke little about the grove, their eyes darkening when the subject came up. They told me stories, whispered warnings about the spirits said to roam among the stalks after sunset. But I was skeptical. Spirits, ghosts, I thought those were just tales to scare children. On my second evening there, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep indigo, I decided to explore the bamboo grove alone. The village was quiet, save for the soft rustling of the bamboo leaves, swaying gently in the wind. As I stepped beneath the towering stalks, the light dimmed rapidly, swallowed by the thick canopy. The air cooled, and the usual sounds of the village faded into an eerie silence. The bamboo seemed to close in around me, shadows twisting with every movement. That's when I saw it, a small, flickering lantern hanging from one of the bamboo stalks. It was unlike any lantern I'd seen. Simple, old-fashioned, with paper sides glowing a soft amber in the dusk. Curious, I moved closer. Suddenly, a gentle breeze stirred the leaves, and with it came a faint melody, an old, haunting tune, played on a shamisen. It was so faint I wondered if I was imagining it. Then the lantern's light flickered, casting dancing shadows that looked like pale figures weaving between the bamboo. I blinked hard, but the shapes vanished as quickly as they had appeared. A chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination, fueled by stories and the forest's natural mystery. I decided to turn back, but the path I thought I was following seemed to shift. The bamboo stalks rearranged themselves, and the grove grew thicker, darker. My heartbeat quickened. I wasn't lost, exactly, but the grove was playing tricks on me. I stopped and closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. When I opened them, the lantern was right in front of me again, swaying gently as if inviting me to follow. Against my better judgment, I followed. The melody grew louder, more distinct, a slow, mournful song. Shadows flickered in the corner of my vision. I heard whispered voices speaking in an old dialect I couldn't understand. Then I saw her, a woman dressed in a flowing white kimono, her long black hair loose and shimmering under the lantern's light. Her face was pale, almost translucent, with dark eyes that seemed both sad and knowing. She glided silently among the bamboo, never quite touching the ground. I froze. The woman stopped and looked at me, tilting her head slightly. I felt no fear, only a strange calm, like she was a guardian of the grove rather than a threat. She reached out, and for a moment I thought she might touch me. Instead, she handed me a small folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. On it was written a single phrase in elegant calligraphy: "Return before the final bell tolls." Before I could ask what it meant, she vanished into the shadows, leaving the lantern's glow flickering softly. I turned and hurried back, the bamboo whispering softly as if guiding me home. I reached the village just as the clock tower in the town square began to chime midnight, each bell echoing through the still night air. I never saw the woman again, but that night I understood the village's warning. Some spirits watch over the land, not to harm, but to protect sacred places from those who would linger too long. I left the grove feeling humbled, a quiet respect settling in my heart for the mysteries hidden beneath the bamboo's towering stalks. Since then, every time I hear the sound of a shamisen or see a flickering lantern in the dark, I remember the Lady of the Bamboo Grove, and I know some stories are true, even if they don't end in horror. Japan is a country of whispers and shadows, where the past clings like morning mist, and the spirits of old still roam the mountains and forests. I grew up hearing stories about yurei, restless spirits bound to this world by sorrow or regret, and about mysterious creatures that lurk in the dark. But nothing prepared me for the night we spent in Kurokawa, a remote village tucked away in the mountains. My friends and I decided to visit Kurokawa during the Obon Festival, a time when families honor their ancestors by lighting lanterns to guide wandering spirits home. It was supposed to be beautiful. Lanterns floating on the river, paper lanterns hung along narrow streets, soft music drifting through the air. But Kurokawa had a secret. We arrived as dusk painted the sky in shades of deep purple and crimson. The village was smaller than I imagined. Old wooden houses with tiled roofs, narrow cobblestone streets winding between them. Lanterns hung from eaves and trees, their soft glow reflecting in the calm river that curved through the village like a silver snake. The air smelled of incense and wet earth, and there was a stillness, as if the village was holding its breath. We wandered along the riverbank, watching the lanterns drift on the water's surface. Families gathered in quiet groups, offering prayers and lighting candles. The festival was peaceful, almost serene. But then I noticed something strange. Among the gentle flicker of lights, there were some lanterns that moved against the current. Slow, deliberate, as if guided by unseen hands. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light or the gentle wind shifting them back upstream, but the movements were too purposeful. A chill crept down my spine. One of my friends, Yuki, pointed toward the forest on the far side of the river. "Look," she whispered, "lanterns floating in the trees." I squinted into the dark tangle of bamboo and cedar. Yes, there they were, tiny lanterns suspended from branches, glowing softly like fireflies caught in the night. But what sent my heart racing was that the lanterns weren't hanging still. They swayed gently as if something unseen was moving through the forest. "Do you think ghosts?" I asked quietly. Yuki nodded. "They say, during Obon, spirits walk among us, searching for their way home." We decided to follow the river upstream, curious and uneasy. The lanterns led us to a narrow stone bridge arching over a quiet bend. As we crossed, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. The air thickened with an almost tangible presence, like the weight of many eyes watching us. Suddenly, a soft song floated on the breeze. A haunting melody sung in a voice so delicate it seemed barely human. The notes wove through the trees, wrapping around us like a silk thread. We stopped, mesmerized. From the shadows emerged a figure, a woman dressed in a white kimono, her long black hair hanging loose and wet. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight. I swallowed hard, frozen in place. She stepped lightly, almost floating, moving slowly toward the riverbank where the lanterns drifted. "Yurai." Yuki breathed. The woman raised her hand, and the lanterns in the trees flickered and danced, as if responding to her touch. She began to sing again, her voice growing clearer, a sorrowful lullaby that echoed with centuries of longing. But she did not approach us. Instead, she moved gracefully along the river's edge, guiding the floating lanterns upstream, her song carrying them home. We followed quietly, respecting the sacred ritual unfolding before us. The forest seemed alive with the whispers of forgotten souls, the moonlight filtering through the leaves like a blessing. As the final lantern floated out of sight, the woman paused and turned toward us. Her eyes met mine, and though her gaze was cold and distant, I felt no fear, only a profound sadness, like a soul yearning for peace. Then she faded into the mist, leaving the night calm once more. We stood in silence, the magic of that moment settling around us like a dream. The next morning, the village was bright and bustling again, the mysterious lanterns gone with the dawn. We left Kurokawa with a quiet reverence for the spirits we had glimpsed, and the knowledge that some nights, in some places, the veil between worlds grows thin. The Yurei may wander, but they seek no harm. They simply search for the light, to lead them home, and in that there is a strange, bittersweet beauty. I had always been fascinated by the old folk tales my grandmother told me growing up in Japan. Stories of yurei, restless spirits, and mysterious apparitions haunting the shrines and forests. So when I got the chance to visit a remote village, in the mountains during Obon Festival, I jumped at it. The villagers said the forest near the village was alive with spirits during that time, and they celebrated with lanterns to guide them home. We arrived late in the afternoon. The village was small, nestled between towering cedars and mist-shrouded hills. Paper lanterns hung from every doorway, their soft orange light flickering in the early evening breeze. The air smelled faintly of incense and damp earth. Our host, an elderly woman named Keiko, welcomed us warmly and told us to be cautious when walking near the forest after dark. "The spirits are watching," she said with a gentle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, after a dinner of grilled fish and steamed rice, We joined the villagers for the lantern ceremony at the edge of the forest. Hundreds of lanterns floated on the still river, their reflections shimmering like stars. The village elders whispered prayers and children giggled, running between the trees. As the last lanterns drifted away, I felt a chill brush over me despite the warm summer air. The forest seemed darker than before, as if it had swallowed the village whole. My friends and I decided to walk a little into the woods, drawn by curiosity and the soft glow of a single lantern hanging on a low branch, swaying gently. The forest was silent except for the crunch of our footsteps on the dry leaves. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the shadows became. Suddenly, the air thickened with a sweet, heavy scent, like lilies mixed with something metallic. Then I heard it, a faint humming, soft and distant, like a lullaby carried on the wind. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. My friend Aiko nodded, eyes wide. "It's coming from over there." We followed the sound, weaving between ancient trees draped with moss and vines. The humming grew louder, almost hypnotic, until we came upon a small clearing lit by dozens of tiny fireflies. In the center stood a woman dressed in a flowing white kimono, her long black hair cascading down her back. She held a paper lantern, glowing with an eerie blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Her face was pale as moonlight, and her eyes, deep and dark, held centuries of sorrow. I wanted to call out, to ask who she was, but my voice stuck in my throat. The woman began to chant, softly, words I couldn't understand but that felt ancient and sacred. The fireflies swirled around her like a living halo, their light dancing on the mist. My friends and I stood frozen, caught between fear and awe. Then, without warning, she turned her head slowly and looked straight at me. I felt a wave of emotions crash through me. Loneliness, longing, a plea for something lost long ago. She stepped forward, raising the lantern higher, and in that moment, I saw a faint smile grace her lips. Then she vanished, dissolving into the mist like a wisp of smoke. The humming faded, and the forest was silent once more. We hurried back to the village, hearts pounding but unharmed. Keiko was waiting near the lantern-lit path. "You saw her," she said softly. "Yes," I whispered. "Who was she?" "The Lady of the Blue Lantern," Keiko replied. "A spirit bound to the forest, waiting for her lost love to return." That night, as I lay beneath the tatami mats, I felt a strange peace. The forest spirits were watching, yes, but they weren't here to harm us. They were guardians of memory, of love and loss, guiding the living to remember the past without fear. I left the village the next day with a new respect for the unseen world that surrounds us, knowing that some stories aren't meant to frighten, but to remind us of the delicate threads that bind life and death. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear the lady's lullaby, carried on the lantern's glow. I had always been fascinated by Japan's rural countryside, the deep forests, ancient temples, and especially the bamboo groves. When I was offered a chance to visit a small village near Kyoto, I jumped at it. My plan was simple: spend a few days exploring the famous bamboo forest near Arashiyama, then relax in a ryokan, soaking in hot springs and enjoying the quiet. On my second evening, after a long day of wandering through temples and narrow streets, I decided to visit the bamboo grove at dusk. The locals had warned me gently, with polite smiles, not to linger after dark. "There are things you cannot see in daylight," one elderly shopkeeper had said, his eyes clouded but serious. I shrugged it off as superstition. After all, the bamboo grove was a popular tourist spot, and I was alone but cautious. The sun was just dipping below the horizon as I entered the grove. The tall bamboo stalks swayed gently in the evening breeze, their shadows long and twisting on the forest floor. The path was quiet except for the soft crunch of my footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves. As I walked deeper, the sky faded into a deep indigo, the last light filtering through the dense green canopy above. The air grew cooler and the silence thickened. Then I noticed something unusual. A faint flicker of orange light far ahead, moving slowly through the bamboo. Curious, I followed it cautiously. The glow was soft but steady, like a lantern being carried by someone walking just out of sight. As I stepped closer, I saw the outline of a figure draped in a white kimono, moving gracefully through the grove. My heart quickened. The figure stopped and turned slowly toward me, but her face was hidden beneath a large straw hat, shadows obscuring her features. I couldn't tell if she was real or some kind of spirit. "Excuse me," I called softly, but she did not answer. Instead, she lifted the lantern higher, its warm light casting eerie patterns on the bamboo stalks. I hesitated, but felt compelled to follow. The figure moved silently, almost floating, deeper into the grove, where the path twisted and narrowed. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. The whispering began. Not voices, but a low rustling, like the bamboo itself was sighing secrets. I stopped and looked around, but no one was there except the figure ahead, who had now vanished. Where did she go? I whispered to myself, unease settling like a stone in my stomach. I turned to leave, but the path seemed unfamiliar. The bamboo stalks formed an impenetrable wall behind me. No matter which way I stepped, I couldn't find the way back. Panic flickered, but I forced myself to breathe. I remembered the old shopkeeper's warning. There are things you cannot see in daylight. Was I caught in some ancient spirit's trap? Then, through the mist rising from the forest floor, the lantern light appeared again, this time floating, toward me from deeper in the grove. The soft glow grew brighter, and with it came a voice, soft and melodic, like a lullaby sung long ago. The voice wasn't threatening. It was sad, gentle, and somehow familiar. I followed the lantern to a small clearing where a stone shrine stood, weathered by centuries. The figure knelt there, setting down the lantern beside a tiny wooden statue. Slowly, the woman turned her face toward me. Her eyes were pale as moonlight, shimmering with an otherworldly glow. But instead of fear, I felt an odd calm wash over me. She spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You do not belong here. Leave before the night deepens." I nodded, grateful for the kindness despite the warning. "I will. Thank you." She smiled faintly and disappeared into the bamboo, leaving the lantern's glow to fade with the rising mist. With a sudden breeze, the bamboo parted, revealing the familiar path out of the grove. I hurried back toward the village, my heart pounding but unharmed. The next day, I asked the locals about the woman in white and the lantern. They told me of the yokai of the bamboo grove, a spirit who appeared at dusk to guide or warn travelers who had lost their way. She was said to be the guardian of the forest's secrets, protecting it from those who might disrespect its ancient peace. I never saw the lantern or the woman again. But sometimes, when the wind blows through the bamboo at dusk, I swear I can hear her lullaby, soft, haunting, and full of sorrow. And I remember her warning. Some places hold stories that only come alive in twilight, and some spirits watch patiently, waiting for the night to fall.